Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast. I'm Philip Ideson, a 20-year procurement practitioner, former head of procurement, advisor to procurement leaders around the world, and the founder and managing director of Art of Procurement. My team and I work with our global network of subject matter experts to help companies elevate procurement's impact, whether that's through building and implementing transformation programs, sustainably reducing external expenses, or leveraging AOP Mastermind, our learning and development platform for companies of all sizes. You're listening to our flagship podcast, where we pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that leading procurement teams are using to align their results with the needs of the business. Hi everybody, welcome to today's Art of Procurement podcast, and today is the last of our special Rewind series where I dipped into the archive to bring you some of my favourite episodes all the way back from 2016. But fear not, these episodes that I've shared are just as relevant as when I first recorded them, and we are going to be back next week with original shows to kick off the autumn or the fall, depending on where you are in the world, season. Well, the episode I want to reshare today is actually episode 14, so it goes way back into the archive, and it's with Tim Jones, the head of sourcing at Google. So our conversation documents Google's journey to become a trusted advisor within their procurement group. Google's approach includes tactics around stakeholder engagement that I often recommend to procurement teams who are on their own journey from tactical to strategic, regardless of the size of your company. So let's jump right into the part of the conversation where I asked Tim to share what the state of procurement was at the beginning of their transformational journey.
Well, I think it stems to when I joined Google, we set up the strategic sourcing function from scratch at that time. 8 years ago, Google was still, very much just emerging from its startup mode. It was, I think, 10,000 employees compared with about 60,000 today. The revenue is about a tenth of where it is today.
Right.
We were just kind of setting out, and we as we set out that strategic sourcing team, we kind of worked on any project that came up and help the business kind of get professional about the suppliers it was using. When I took over the team about 4 years ago, we realized we had a kind of a random portfolio of projects we were working on, and some were much more important and relevant than others. So it was at that point really that we wanted to get out of this kind of RFP factory, if you like, this serial unrelated projects mode that we were in, and be more deliberate about what we worked on and why we were working on it. And really to make sure that the value we was adding was in the advice we were giving, right, and the support we were giving to the big budget holders within the business.
Just to focus a little bit more on kind of what the state was going in, and what I often see where procurement is often viewed as more transactional, or where it is more focused on RFPs, is that you're really focusing on savings, on pushing a strategic sourcing process, and maybe shoehorning stakeholders into a bit of a one-size-fits-all approach. Is that fair to say that's how it was at Google, or were you a little bit different from that?
So, certainly back then, there was a big emphasis on growth. Mm-hmm. So suppliers were being brought on board prior to the strategic sourcing function really getting involved. Suppliers were being brought on board, without a lot of thought and professional input, really. So, with some exceptions. We were really in emergency mode at the beginning, and just trying to fix some of the either non-performing supplier relationships we were in, right, or suppliers where we'd worked with a small company when our own requirements were small. Google had had grown exponentially, and the supply wasn't able to keep up. So there were lots of those where we were kind of trying to fix the delivery.
Right, kind of in firefighting mode.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how did the stakeholders? What was their point of view of procurement at that point? Were you there, somebody to call when they had fires to put out, or were they? Did they understand the value proposition that you could bring to them?
I think unlike other companies I've worked with or seen, we had a very and still do have a client base of very enthusiastic stakeholders.
Yeah.
So they're very keen to get support. They've often not worked in the business very long themselves, so are not emotionally wedded to their suppliers in the way that I've seen in other places. So people here are very open to change, very keen to get another perspective. So we have no shortage of work. I think our problem isn't one of selling; it's one of prioritization. So it's about selecting the projects to work on which are most value to the business, given limited resource, limited size of team.
And so when you take a step back and look at the beginning of your journey, what was the platform or the strengths that you built that off? It sounds like you weren't coming from scratch. So, looking at some organizations that see, well, I've not really done things right and nobody in the organization really respects procurement. And so we need to do a complete 180 from where we are. It looked like it's more iterative. So you had a platform within the organization. You had people who were willing to work with you, but like you say, you didn't have necessarily the resources to do everything. What strengths did you then want to take, into when you started looking at your journey? What were the best things that you think that you did as an organization at that point?
From a starting point perspective, one of our big strengths was the team. We'd hired a very strong team of people with great procurement skills, but also great stakeholder management skills. So had great communication, very plausible when talking to stakeholders, built those sort of instant credibility. So that was a great strength we had. I think from a weakness point of view, we'd accepted every job that we'd been sent, as it were. Any project that came up, we were keen to help and jumped on it, and that meant we worked on some very meaningful big projects, but also some things that were either speculative or not really core to the business.
And how are you able to step out from that? Because it's hard, isn't it, when you set the stakeholder expectation? Now they think that they can throw anything over the fence to you, and as you look at reprioritizing on the things that are more strategic, there's things that have to fall by the wayside, and that often upsets a lot of people. What worked for you in being able to do that?
Well, I think it was a matter really of empowering the team just to explain the situation, and I think people got it quite quickly when we pointed to the projects that we were working on. That I work with those stakeholders to help us prioritize. What is more important to them in terms of the kind of portfolio of projects we could be working on. And I think as we explained it to people, then it made sense, and that wasn't. There was a few uncomfortable conversations as we went in to disappoint people, but actually not too bad. Not as bad as we feared.
Yeah, they probably were happy that you weren't in their hair for some of the things where you were bringing procurement process where they really didn't see any value of engaging you in the first place.
Yeah, I think we very much positioned it as you are empowered to make this decision yourself. Here are some templates if you need those. Here's some guidance. We're always there at the end of a phone call to offer advice, but really just saying to people, look, you're empowered to make this relatively small decision yourself.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned before that you were kind of had a difficulty of being an RFP shop, and that you were taking everything that was coming your way as you started to grow. the procurement capability and the procurement organization, as you looked at what the next stage of your journey would look like, were you looking to, to look at other things like maybe more strategic buying? It's not all about just reducing cost through competitive bidding, for example. There's other ways that you can help Google buy smarter, and maybe it's not just all about reducing total cost. Were those considerations as you look to what you wanted to become?
Yes. So, we're still very strong believers in competitive bidding. And that's our kind of go-to strategy, if you like. But we are working more now with stakeholders to look at things like process improvement in how they buy. Can they buy earlier or bigger, or those sort of buying strategies that I think the journey we've been on to become those more advisor role has given us space to, one, think about that, and two, have the relationship with the stakeholder where they'll listen and value those opinions about different ways of buying.
I guess it changes the conversation as well, doesn't it? That you're not just coming in there to beat up the suppliers that they want to maintain a relationship with, but maybe help them buy so that they get more out of that relationship, maybe even for the same price, rather than just cutting 10-15% off by doing an e-auction, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to shift over to the journey that you took to actually become trusted business partners. And I think the first thing that you looked at is really to start looking at how you create some space within your team, or you talked before about you had too much work to do, so taking some of the work off your team's plate so they could think a little bit more strategically.
Yes.
I just wonder if you could elaborate a little bit more on what that looked like.
Yeah, when we looked at how the team spent their time, sure, they spent a good chunk on the high quality stakeholder interactions. Those things like discussing sourcing strategy, really defining service definition, service requirements and service levels, those sorts of things. And then in the supplier evaluation and discussing through what the ideal stakeholder, the ideal supply characteristics were. But they also spent a lot of time on relatively mundane administrative tasks, things like getting non-disclosure agreements signed, or chasing suppliers for RFP responses, or scheduling meetings with suppliers. So we, having recognized there's that administrative work to be done, we then ran an RFP for a outsourced provider who could work with our team on those administrative tasks and really free up the time of my sourcing managers to focus on those high-value stakeholder interactions.
And so when you made that call, was it always a decision to go to a third party, or was there a consideration of building, like an internal shared services team? Because I'm sure that at Google you probably had the scale to be able to do that, although it would take you longer to implement it and was maybe a little bit more complex than going the third party route.
I think we're really driven by headcount considerations. One of the constraints here at Google is growing headcount, and also kind of the skill set of the we want an employee base with a high value skill set. So there's not a culture here of having those more administrative roles in house. So I think where we thought we could get headcount, I wanted to use that headcount for senior relationship managers rather than these kind of administrative type tasks.
Right. No, it makes sense, especially with the constraints that you had on headcount.
Yeah.
So how did you decide which tasks were outsourceable versus those that were really core to, what your capability was in building the relationships, essentially? How did you decide what to stay and what could go?
We went through our 6-step sourcing process, looked at each of the tasks that we have under each of those steps, and just really looked at the evaluation of is there a meaningful stakeholder interaction, and if there was, that's something we wanted to keep very much in-house, or was it a very repeatable, defined task that someone could do remotely.
And when you started the process, was it like a big bang? Today you are doing this all on internally, and then tomorrow you have all this help and they're taking over all these tasks, or was it a lot more of a phased implementation?
I think it was a little bit more phased. We were feeling our way.
Yeah.
We started with a small team in the supplier in India, and started with the more obvious administrative tasks, and then kind of grew over time to where now that that team is doing a lot of market research for us, for example, which is providing more insights and more high value work themselves. So we've grown that relationship over time.
And that's actually great, because that's what I, in my day job, kind of recommend companies to do, is that there's so much opportunity in outsourcing tasks within the suite of activities that a strategic procurement professional will do. Start small, and then you find all kinds of ways when you've built trust with a partner that you can lever the support that they can bring, and doing things then that become accretive to what you're doing. It's not just taking over tasks and it being a resource issue and freeing up resource, to actually bringing intelligence to you that you can execute on. So it's great to hear that you've got to that point with your service provider. Okay, so the next step that I'd like to move into was around customer management. And now you have freed up the time of your team to focus on key stakeholders, figuring out who those key stakeholders are. I wonder if you could just give an overview into kind of how you looked at segmenting the stakeholders that you were working with into those that were ones that you wanted to focus more resources on, and those that maybe would be better served in a more of a self-service model.
Yeah, I think segmentation is a great word there. We looked at the whole range of people we were working with and running RFPs with. We looked at our spend analysis and where the big budgets were and who was spending them, and really. Having looked at that, it became quite obvious that there were perhaps as few as sort of 15 people in the business who had large scopes, spent hundreds of millions of dollars, were working in areas that were strategic to the business, were relatively senior, that they had the span of control, but not so senior that they weren't involved in the day-to-day details or unconcerned of the particular supplier that we were using. So those people really kind of stood out when we looked at the range of stakeholders, and we really started to build a program around those individuals. We started calling them our platinum stakeholders in a little bit of a nod to kind of airline reward programs. Right. And so having identified that group of 15 platinum stakeholders, we really then looked to invest time in understanding their business, understanding what was important to them, what their plans were for the months and quarters and years ahead, what kind of category knowledge we needed to support their market knowledge, and really kind of centering our organization around those individuals. A little later, we grew that to a lower tier, a kind of gold tier. Some of those gold stakeholders are either in the teams of the platinum stakeholders, so sort of supporting figures to them, or they're in businesses which are a little bit smaller or a little bit less strategic to the company's aims. And we similarly look to spend some time understanding their business, understanding how we can support them, what their plans are, but really try and focus most of the effort on those group of platinum stakeholders.
So for those platinum stakeholders, did you put in place formal engagement programs with them, maybe governance programs? How did you look at them?
Yeah, so we looked at, first of all, having, a name against them from our team. So, we had a sort of dedicated, a person who's kind of dedicated to
like
each one
lead.
of those who would then build an engagement plan. That's kind of a formal document that they needed to present to me as a kind of a forcing function. And that really, encouraged my team to really understand those people's businesses. We asked them to create a kind of matrix of what was important to those stakeholders. Of the potential services we could offer, what they value, and how we were performing against that, and we saw that the needs of those stakeholders, differed considerably depending on perhaps the maturity of their own organizations. Some of those teams needed, a lot of help on supply management, for example, where others had invested in their own vendor management teams, and needed less support on those. Some of them needed global coordination. So, that's where, my team, having a thin presence around the world, was able to kind of bring in knowledge from what teams in APAC or teams in Latin America were doing that could help support the European business or the US business. So as I say, those needs differed by stakeholder, but we were able to, in a very deliberate way, rank them and then build action plans. 3 or 4 things that we needed to do to improve the relationship with each one of those individuals.
And how did that resonate with those individuals? Were they happy to have a white glove treatment, or were they hoping that you would go away and kind of leave them to do what they want to do on their own? Or was it stakeholder by stakeholder, a very different response?
Yeah, I mean, I think it varied a little bit by individual, but generally, these are people that we've demonstrated value to. As I said earlier, stakeholders at Google generally are very open to help, and I think the other advantage of working in a very non-mandated environment like Google is that where there are perhaps 1 or 2 areas of the business that are more resistant to support, then we don't have to support them. There's plenty of other work to do. Right. There's no point wasting our time really on people who don't want that support and who aren't going to listen to us. And one of the things I'm very keen for the team not to do is waste time on stakeholders who aren't going to listen to them, and or going through RFPs just for going through the motions, or not looking to change anything. I don't think there's any point in that, and so try and steer the team away from those kind of projects.
And so I'm guessing then spend under management isn't as great a metric as it may be for others, because that can often drive just going after stakeholders for the sake of it to get spend into a procurement program. But I think it's a lot more of a incisive kind of strategy. You pick the stakeholders that you want to approach, build strategies around them and that want to work with you, and then see how you can create value from them rather than trying to bring everybody into your funnel.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, it's really trying to prioritize, focus the resources on where we can have most impact. And if there's an area where we can't have an impact, either because maybe we've already run RFP processes on their top 5 suppliers, or maybe they are very happy with who they have and don't want to change. In those circumstances, there's no point in kind of going through the motions and running projects for the sake of it, and let's focus where we are needed.
And so, from a platinum stakeholder, it's a very formal engagement program. When you look at a gold stakeholder, is that more just making sure you keep in touch and you keep engaged with stakeholders who you've assigned kind of that level to, or is there still a formal program around gold stakeholder engagement?
Yeah, so I'd encourage my team members to have a document where they've spent some time thinking about that engagement, but it's not something that they need to present to me, for example. We've moved on now from these simple documents, plans, to using a CRM system. We have a Salesforce instance where we track interactions with all our stakeholders actually, but particularly the platinum and gold. And so within that Salesforce system, at any time, those stakeholders are flagged as platinum or gold, but also have a set of actions against them. So my management team can go in at any time, or I can go in at any time and just kind of see what the actions are, see what business plans they've discussed, what the pipeline of projects is, and what are the things we're going to be working on over the next weeks and months with those people.
So I actually, and that really segues nicely, because I was going to ask you about the technology that you use to kind of manage your engagement program. And just for listeners who may not be aware of what a CRM tool is, could you just give a real quick intro as to what one of those tools is?
Yeah, I mean, classically they're used by sales teams for tracking the lead to sale process. All those teams selling to us procurement people would be very familiar with tools like Salesforce, which keep track of those potential customers. And so I'm sure many of your listeners will be named on the tools of their suppliers, and you can often, as you feel yourself being sold to, you can see people kind of mentally ticking things off in their CRM tool.
Yeah, every time you wonder how somebody remembers what soccer team you support, it's because it came up in their Salesforce tool before they spoke to you.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a classic use.
So what made you? I actually love the fact that you use a CRM tool, and I feel that you start looking at stakeholders or potential stakeholders more as prospects, and you have that formal engagement funnel, if you will, to drive them through, and it just becomes a lot more of a data-driven process that allows you to test things, see what works, see what doesn't work, and get the reporting out on it. What made you decide to implement it?
It was particularly that reporting function, really, that I was telling the team that this stakeholder interaction was the most important thing, that the advice they gave to stakeholders was the way that we really added value to the organization. And yet the thing I measured was projects.
Right.
We measured project delivery, rate reductions, classic procurement measures. So really the CRM tool was a way of balancing, what I said was important with what we measured. So the CRM tool has kind of two halves to it, I think, which are very related. I think we started to think of two different universes, really, one of projects and one of stakeholders, and realized kind of halfway through the implementation that they were very entwined and really two sides of the same coin. So we use the tool, first of all, to track those stakeholders, flag our platinum and gold stakeholders, track the interactions, the meetings we have with them, the presentations that they've given to us about their business plans, our quarterly business reviews that we have with them, that sort of information. And then on the other side, we when projects come out of those relationships, we track those projects on the CRM tool as well. So at any point, we can look at what projects we have in the pipeline, what projects that we're working on, what projects have closed, and the sort of metrics from them in terms of either savings or we also run some customer satisfaction surveys from that tool. So, what do the stakeholders think of the interaction with us? That's all tracked through the CRM tool as well.
And it sounds like it's a real good way of kind of institutionalizing all the knowledge that you have as well. That a lot of times these interactions, you lose them when somebody moves into a new team or moves on to a different organization. And because you have it in there already, it's there ready and waiting for the next person to come into that seat to actually understand exactly how this stakeholder thinks, what's important to them, what they're working on. That's on itself, if it did nothing more than that, I think is a huge benefit.
Yeah, I mean, that was very insightful. Yeah, that was kind of one of these fringe benefits that we kind of realized as we were building the tool, but actually has turned out to be a really huge benefit for us as, we've shuffled the team around, or, we've tried to learn cross-region. We had a great example of our VP who involved in data center construction, is stuck in an airport in Hong Kong with one of our team. They have a great discussion on sort of the business plans in that airport, and I think we would have traditionally lost the input from that discussion, but using the Salesforce tool, we were able to make some notes, store them, and distribute them widely. So that kind of information sharing has been really valuable.
And did you have any resistance to implementing it within your team? It's a big change. I've seen it on the sales side, and people can think, well, this is a burden. It's administrative. I don't get much value from it. A bit of a pain. And so even on the sales side, you get that. I wonder if on the buyer side it was the same, or if your colleagues and your team kind of understood where you were trying to go with it and saw the shared value in it.
So it was one of the things we were worried about as we were designing the tool, and something that we very much took a design philosophy of making it easy for the team to very quickly transfer information from calendar or from email into the tool, to make notes very quickly, kind of one-touch selection of stakeholders. And so in that kind of customization of the tool, we were very, very conscious of not adding too much of a burden to the team. Mm-hmm. I think generally, though, I was impressed with how quickly the kind of team got it. That they wanted to have a more strategic relationship with their stakeholders. They didn't want to be known just for running RFP processes, right, or running auctions, and so they saw this as a way to be recognized for the investment that they were putting in those stakeholder meetings, and I think we've all experienced putting a lot of effort into those kind of sales type calls, or investing in building a relationship, and it taking time to see the fruits of that in projects or savings. So now they could point to the groundwork they were doing, right, and the great relationships, right, they were building, without necessarily having yet to see the auction come out of it.
So I'm cognizant of time and know that we're running up against kind of how long we have to talk today. So I just had one final question, and that was, if you were talking to a peer in procurement who was about to start this journey themselves, and they were thought of more of a transactional, tactical RFP support team rather than being truly strategic and a true business partner, where would you recommend that they start to go on the journey that you've been on?
I think the step that had the biggest impact for us was that customer segmentation.
Yeah.
So really trying to identify who the people were who had the biggest impact on the business, whether that's the dollars they were spending or their alignment with the company's kind of strategic direction. Really focusing the team around those individuals, what's important to those particular people, as I look at their own objectives. So I think that was the step that got the biggest mind shift for us. But I'd also recommend the outsourcing of the administrative work as well. That's been huge for us and enable us to scale in a way that Otherwise, we would have been swamped under the deluge of NDAs we were trying to get signed,
Right.
or meetings we were trying to set up.
Yeah, I guess it's all well and good having the strategy that you want to execute, but if you don't have the bandwidth to do it, you're in a bit of a catch-22.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Tim, first of all, thank you so much for your time today. I actually love the journey that you've been on, and I was really, I heard it at a recent conference and thought that it's something that I really wanted the listeners of Art of Procurement to hear about, because the steps in there that everybody can execute, and I really like the fact that you're using technology and using a CRM tool to then start delivering against it, because that's something that I really very rarely hear, and you really only hear it on the sales side, not really on the procurement side. So I think there's an awful lot of opportunity for companies to look into doing something like that as a way of looking a little bit more strategically at how they engage with their stakeholders. So, Tim, what's the best way for anybody to contact you if they have any questions?
So I've an active profile on LinkedIn, so you can find me there, Tim Jones. I'm very happy to hear people through that, and look forward to hearing from some of your audience.
Awesome. Well, I'll include a link to your profile and a summary of today's conversation in the show notes. Those are going to be available at artofprocurement.com/Google. So, Tim, thank you very much again. To subscribe to our regular newsletter, the AOP Insider, and never miss an episode of the podcast, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. And you can find our back catalogue from the past 5 years at artofprocurement.com.